Hi everybody, this is Laura, City Scrapper. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a Shimmerz Paints layout for you. For this layout, I use one of the pattern papers from the August color kits. I also use one of the cut files from the Shimmerz website. I love title cut files. Usually when I use a cut file, it's a title cut file. And I saw this one that said Sisters Are Sweet. And since I have two daughters, I have many photos that I could use with this cut file. Using my Silhouette Cameo, I cut this cut file out 3 times. I cut it out of white cardstock and pattern paper without most of the inner cuts. I did leave the heart. Then I cut the cut file again out of white cardstock, this time with all of the inner cuts. And then I layered them all together with the solid white cardstock on the bottom and then the pattern paper on top of it, and then the piece with all of the cutouts on the very top. The reason that I use the piece of cardstock on the bottom is that I'm going to do a lot of stitching on this cut file, and I find that I like the cut file to be very sturdy so that the stitches don't pull through. And although that can be fixed, it's just so much easier when there is something substantial to stitch through. So after I have glued all the pieces together, I use this little poking tool. This is an Amy Tangerine tool that I bought years and years ago, I think in TJ Maxx, and the mat that came with it, although the mat is pretty shot after all these years, but I'm still able to use it. And I'm punching holes all around the inside of the cut file, and I'm going to use some black embroidery floss and stitch all around the inside. Usually when I stitch on my cut files, I use a back stitch. It's very simple and I like the results. And I love the way stitching adds texture. And in this case, that black line really helped to define the title. It made it a lot easier to read because I used a busy pattern paper. So now I'm going to begin working on my background. I'm going to be using some Shimmerz paints. The first paint that I used is an inkling, and it's called Absolutely Mauvulous. I love that name. I am using some packaging and using it to press the color down onto the background paper. I'm using a piece of 120-pound cardstock, and I've already applied some white gesso to the surface. I started off with some bubble wrap, then I used a regular piece of plastic, and then I decided that I wanted to continue with the bubble wrap because I really liked the texture that the bubble wrap added to the paint. I sprayed the background with a little bit of water to help move the color around. When using Shimmerz inklings, I find that you can build up the color and create some really cool effects. So I am continuing to add color to the bubble wrap, add a little bit of water, and then almost stamp it around the page using that bubble wrap. You can use inklings to apply color evenly, but I wanted there to be some areas that were a little darker and some areas that were a little lighter. So I'm building up color, but not over the whole background in a uniform way. I'm trying to leave some spots a little lighter than others, so there'll be some variation. I'm going to be placing the cut file right over the painted background. So I want to make sure that there's enough contrast between the cut file and the background. Without this color in the background, the white cut file would blend in too well with the white background. So I want to make sure that I put a decent amount of paint on the background. That way there'll be some layers built up and the color will be a little bit darker. Now I'm adding a little bit of extra water to this paint, and I'm using a small paintbrush and I'm splattering it all around this large area of color on the background. I especially like adding the splatters along the outside edge of color. That way I think it helps to transition the background from white into the larger, more solid area of color. You could see that multiple times I took that cut file and tried it on top of the background just to make sure that I had color in all the areas where I was going to want it. I always think that it's great to have that opportunity to look and see how the cut file is going to look on the background. I add a second color to the background. I'm only going to put small amounts of this one. This is a Shimmerz and it's called Silver Tongue Devil. I again use the packaging technique to spread just a small amount of that color in a couple of places on the background. Now I'm adding some stamping. I'm using Distress Oxide in Victorian Velvet and a script stamp that I love to use and I have in my stash, and I added stamping all over the pink background. Now I'm using a stencil that I received several months ago from Shimmerz Paints. This is a Felicity Jane stencil, and I find that this very simple flower pattern comes in really handy. I've used it quite a few times since I got it. Once again, I'm using Distress Oxide in Victorian Velvet. It seems to complement the color Absolutely Mauvulous very well. Now I'm going to use some watered down white acrylic paint to add some white splatters to the background. I just love the white splatters. I think that it just pulls the whole layout together. For these splatters, I use some acrylic paint in a tube and then I add a lot of water to the container. I mix it up and then they are ready to go whenever I need some white splatters. Because the pink is a light color, I add a lot of splatters because the white paint isn't so easy to see. If I was using a darker color, I might be a little bit more conservative with how many white splatters I added. And then I wanted to add just a few splatters of black acrylic paint. I didn't want to add a lot, but because I have so much black in the cut file, I thought that adding some black splatters would help to tie the background together with the cut file. While I let those splatters dry, I begin working on the rest of the layout. I wanted to put paper on the top and the bottom of the layout, and I finally decided that I was going to use this EK Success scalloped border punch, and I was going to punch out a border for the top and one for the bottom. To do that, I used the paper that was left over from the cut file, but I flipped it over to the pattern on the other side, which I thought was a nice complement to the larger stripes on the cut file. The other side was a more delicate branch. I also cut out 2 border strips using the same punch. This time I cut them out of white cardstock, and then I used some Distress Oxide in Bundled Sage, and I inked the edges of those white border strips. I'm going to be putting those underneath the pattern paper strips. I use a baby wipe to clean up my area, and then I added some ATG adhesive to the back of the pattern paper, and I slightly offset the pattern paper scalloped border punch from the white cardstock one that I colored with the Distress Oxide. This will help this whole border strip contrast with the background. Now that I have the 2 border strips assembled, I'm going to put one at the top of the layout and one on the bottom. I trimmed the border strip a little bit just so that there would be enough room for the border strip and the cut file and the mixed media on the background. And I'm very glad that I cut those strips down a little bit. Before they were a little bit smaller, I felt that the border strips were kind of taking over the space of the cut file and the mixed media. I think it looks more balanced now. I had 2 very thin strips of the pattern paper left over, and I thought that I would mount them at the very top and the very bottom of the layout. I like the way those 2 strips of paper help to balance the layout. I think it's important that all of the colors that were in the cut file, the pinks and the greens, the cranberry and the black, were brought to the top and the bottom of the layout. Now I'm ready to attach the cut file down to the layout. I use some ATG adhesive to do this. I put the cut file right in the center of the background, and then I picked out this photo of both of my daughters to add. I thought that this photo fit nicely on the right-hand side of the layout. I was wondering if I should put another photo on the left-hand side, but then I decided that I was going to put an embellishment cluster there, so there's just going to be this one small photo on this layout. This photo measures 2 3/4 inches square. I first mounted it on some white cardstock, and then I decided to mount it again on some black cardstock. I think that that black outline helps to draw attention to the photo. And then I needed to put some foam behind the photo because the edges were sitting on the cut file, but the center wasn't supported, so I added some foam to support the center of the photo. And now I'm going to start working with these embellishments. I selected a number of different embellishments. A lot of them are florals. There's also a postcard, a heart, a bow, some butterflies, and then there's a really cute little bunny in a teacup, and it doesn't really have to do with the subject of this photo, but I absolutely love that little bunny. I thought it looked so cute sitting in that teacup, so I'm going to include that as well. All of these embellishments have been inked with some Distress ink in Vintage Photo. I'm going to include 3 clusters on this layout. Since the area to the left of the word R is rather large, I put the postcard there, and then I divided all of the flowers among those 3 clusters. There were also some small leafy branches, so I tucked those into each of the clusters as well. And then there were 2 small butterflies. I put one in the cluster on the bottom right, one in the cluster on the top middle, and then I have that cute little bunny in the 3rd cluster, so that one doesn't get a butterfly. Using some fun foam, I popped up 1 flower in each of the 3 clusters to add a little bit of dimension to them. As I added the foam to the flower in each cluster, I carefully arrange all of the elements, and then I use some adhesive and I attach them down. For those little butterflies, I put a tiny bit of foam behind them as well to give them some dimension too. After I finished the 1st cluster, I went around to the 2nd and the 3rd clusters, popping up the flowers and attaching everything down. I added a bow to the top of the cut file on the letter T, and then I began adding some jewels to the background. I'm using some Trico jewels that are in my stash. These are a little white shimmery jewel, and I think they just add a nice bit of bling to the layout without adding another color. So I am cutting these strips of gems into individual pieces and placing them all around the cut file and the background. The jewels come in strips, so I use my detail scissors and I cut them into individual pieces, and I place them all around the background, mainly clustered near the cut file. In my stash, I had some Spiegelmom Scraps sequins. They are really, really tiny sequins, and they're the perfect color, I thought, to go with this layout. So I started spreading those around the layout as well. They won't make a huge difference, but I thought that they would be a nice embellishment. I attach those down with glossy accents, but I don't include the footage because my head is in most of it. Then I was thinking that it might look nice to add a very, very thin piece of black cardstock underneath the strips of paper at the top and the bottom of the layout. So I cut some thin pieces and I used some glue to attach those down to the layout. Then I added just a few pearls to the layout. I put one on the bow at the top of the layout and one on the heart that's to the left of the word R. Then I used some strips of adhesive pearls to put in the centers of both of the 2 butterflies that I have on the page. After I position those pearls on the layout is complete, and here are some close-ups. As always, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to watch this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it. When you place an order with Shimmerz Paints, if you mention my name in the comments box, you'll receive a free gift. The link to the Shimmerz website is posted in the description box if you would like to check out the website. I hope that you have a fantastic day, and I hope to see all of you again soon. Thanks again for watching, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.